live podcast, Struggling with Constant Change, Regain Control with Resource Management. In this live podcast, we'll discuss how effective resource management is the key to staying agile and reacting to constant shifts in work priorities. We'll also share how to remain innovative by putting the right resources on the right work at the right time. Just a reminder that this is a podcast, so this will be an audio-only presentation. We will share the free PDU information with you at the end of the podcast. Again, my name is Jim, and I'm an EPM Live Solution Consultant Specialist for Upland Software. I am joined by my colleague, Jose Levy, who is also in the same role at Upland Software. We're excited to be here as we speak to project and functional managers all over the world in every single industry. I have quite a bit of tenure in this marketplace. I have 24 years of experience in the sales, design, implementation, and training of project and portfolio management processes and systems. I've been doing this for customers and clients over that entire span. Of that time, since 1999, has really specialized in bringing the EPM Live solution to the market and working with customers to promote successful adoption for them. A key part of successful adoption is the planning for and the management of change. So this is something as part of the topic today that I have a lot of experience in. And Jose is joining me. Jose will tell you a little bit about himself.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks, everyone, for joining our podcast. So as a quick introduction, I've been in the project and portfolio management field for the last 18 years. And I started actually as a financial analyst in Wall Street, but moved to the project and portfolio management field, helping customers achieve business outcomes from implementing solutions that have high impact in organizations and in portfolio and project management. So we hope that you obtain some key takeaways with regards to how to improve your resource management process in your organization.
So let me set the foundation of the purpose for this podcast, and so let me start by putting some things into perspective for you. $250 billion. That is what is spent in the United States each year on IT projects. Wow, that's a staggering number, $250 billion. Project managers are key to ensuring that these projects deliver the return on that investment, but 62% of projects are delivered late, and 49% of those projects are over budget at the end of the day. Project management is clearly broken to some degree. Think in terms of fire drills.
And Jim, that's a great metaphor for exactly what one of our customers was going through a few years ago. They came to us with problems of demand for resources widespread from different parts of the organization. It was a constant, never-ending process to the point where they had to do daily prioritization meetings to figure out what everyone was going to have to do in order to meet objectives. Everyone in the organization have different perspectives into visibility and priorities, and they were constantly fighting fires. There was really no consistent approach. So if this sounds familiar to you and your organization, we're going to address some of these issues today. We believe that effective resource management, is a key to staying agile and reacting to constant shifts in work priorities.
So with that, let's just jump into the first topic of the day, how poor resource management leads to challenges in managing change. Well, first of all, you can't manage the need for change if you don't know what, where, or who your resources are. With the speed and sheer complexity of business that's driving rapid change today, with heightened competition, rapid advances in technology, and a global economy, this all has organizations operating at a very dizzying pace. So doing that and responding to that with poor resource management in your organization can be very, very difficult. So what are some of the characteristics of what I mean by a poor resource management state? Well, one of the first things is that it ends up being much more reactive than predictive. We keep responding to requests and demands. We're really kind of the tail being wagged by the dog. Things that don't allow us to kind of be more in control of our destiny as we move forward. Also, another aspect of a poor resource management state is things get very subjective in how resources get allocated. What resources get assigned to what, or what's given highest priority. What should we be working on first? Given contention for resources, who should be being put on these types of things? Who screams the loudest gets the resources. Those are things that tend to be characteristics in that state. Also, resource allocation tends not to be optimized or assigned more likely on more immediate pressing needs. It's the most recent, most current, most painful, loudest thing that's in your ear. Some evidence of this claim is that unplanned projects, the average IT organization spends 45 to 55% of its time on unplanned and urgent activities, meaning that even if some planning is going on, it's the unplanned stuff that comes down, the ad hoc stuff that comes down the pike that tends to bite us. So problems from poor resource management, if I think about it from a metaphor perspective, it's really like a frantic game of whack-a-mole. It's a frantic and frustrating game. The moles keep popping up and you keep trying to whack them and you just don't know where the next mole is going to pop up and how you're going to deal with it or if you're even going to catch it. So very much a like analogy to what sometimes resource management is for an organization. So some of the problems is that you get some resources, the most popular ones, the most skilled ones, are always overutilized in that situation. Everybody goes to their man or woman Friday for the things that they need, and this can lead to burnout and excessive overuse of our most talented resources, the ones that we value the most. And in that case also, you can end up with a lot of resources that end up being over-allocated, and you end up with hidden headcount that you didn't know you had or you might not be using effectively. Also, priorities tend not to be clear to the resources and at the expense of more important work items, meaning if there are competing priorities and we end up working on the wrong things that aren't the most priority items for the goals and objectives of the organization, then we're going to be less than effective in the outcomes. And also there's an opportunity cost of not having the right resources and skill sets, meaning if we're not planning, if we're not looking ahead, if we're not forecasting the demand for resources and we do not have the right resources at the right levels or quantities available at the time that we need them, what ends up happening is either work slips because we can't get to the work or quality suffers because we put maybe not the most optimum resource on the task. So EPM Live as a solution has answers for these problems. We have capacity planning tools that allow you to forecast where your resource demand is going to be from a skill set basis and an individual level basis, and also be able to track changes as the landscape modifies for you in the future. We also have resource analysis tools, so based upon the models you put together in the capacity planning tools, you can look at different scenarios and different ways that you might approach things, like what if we didn't do a certain project, what if we delayed a project, what if we accelerated a project in its timetable. Those are the types of things you can analyze and save scenarios to get the most optimum mix. We also have an intake process to prioritization, meaning as new demands come in, we can put them through a very structured, meaningful and consistent valuation on a prioritization basis so that we can make sure that we're working on the most prioritized, the highest priority things that we get in the organization. And the other key piece is as we execute on the projects, getting real-time or near real-time updates to progress and tracking on how we're delivering, how we're accomplishing work, and what resources we're actually spending or effort we're really spending on these things is something that's very important to be able to monitor, to manage and have effective resource management. So just a quick summary on those topics in a nutshell. We discussed that one, that unstructured resource management ends up being dysfunctional for an organization of any size. It's not limited to organizations, big organizations, small organizations that have a lot of work coming at them have the same type of challenges. Also, disparate tools and spreadsheets really only provide a static model of the information if you plan on those, and that you end up with outdated information very quickly, and that the need to manually update or aggregate that effort to get a clear picture of everything is something that's too cumbersome for most organizations to stay on top of. Also, resource management tends to fall apart if it's a too manual or too cumbersome of a process for the people that have to actually manage it and execute on it. Also, collaboration and byplay between the project and functional organizations tend to break down with poor resource management, meaning that the needs of the functional organizations who supply the resources to the projects and the project managers tends to be less than optimal in the way that gets resources to people at the right time for the right work.
Jim, that's great in terms of how you frame the problem, because I think what we want to do now is understand organization capacity and gain visibility to what team members are working on. And really the first requirement is understanding the resources that you have. And that might sound simplistic, resource management 101, but you'd be surprised how many organizations actually don't have a adequate resource and skill set inventory for everyone in the organization, by location, by department. And what that allows you to do is really understand the work patterns and constraints of the different resource groups. You can't really count on 100% on everyone allocated to project work, especially when you have resources that are, have several different responsibilities. Service-based resources that have to take care of application service requests, can't be 100% allocated to project work. Quality lab resources that are constantly in demand actually have to be spread out over time to different projects. So, you can't really assume that they're always available for project work. So part of the challenge is really accounting for all of the work that resources have in order to define true availability. So the second challenge is really try to understand what's causing the lack of visibility, and I have really 4 points to make here. The first is try to solve your deficiencies in planning demand. Make sure that you actually have a work intake process and that it has structure, and that everybody understands the rules for actually making project requests. The second is try to avoid relying on static models like spreadsheets. By the time they actually get reviewed, they're usually outdated because they don't reflect the latest updates of tasks that have come in to the organization. The third is really try to overcome the challenges in collaboration and communication that occur in a matrix geographically dispersed organization. You have to make sure that everyone's involved in the process and everybody understands where the demand is coming from. At the end of the day, in my fourth point, there's friction between the work owner that is actually trying to submit the request for a resource, and then the actual resource owner that gets to decide the work that their people get to work on. So that separation between operational and project-related work needs to be resolved. That blurring of project and non-project work that occurs needs to be brought to the surface and dialogue between the work owner and the resource owner. And with respect to EPM Live, we can help resolve some of these problems by allowing you to clearly define the method and process that fits your organization for that work intake and that visibility of the resources. You can rely on our flexible platform that can accommodate your current state of resource management and evolve over time by allowing you access to more capabilities as you mature. The organization can account for all work from all the resources if you do it correctly and use the right solution. For us, it's very important to integrate the work status so that as team members provide updates, you can understand what's taking place, and you can revise your forecast from looking at actuals versus planned work. So with this particular topic of understanding capacity and visibility, I just want to summarize by saying, capacity is really theoretical. It's what we should be getting from the resources if we understand what they're really working on. And that means taking into account all the different work that's being assigned to them by a resource owner. Visibility, on the other hand, is about data integrity and understanding actuals and having accurate forecasts of resource allocation and execution. Really, the purpose is to establish the rules of engagement with the right process and tools for collaboration between the project and functional organization, so you can have a true picture of what the resource needs are for all the work. Everyone.
All right, well, let's summarize the first two topics that we've covered. We talked about how poor resource management leads to challenges in managing change, and change is ever present and ever coming, and how to understand your resource organization's capacity and to gain visibility into what your team members are working on. So responding to change and then just understanding the landscape of our resource capacity is something that's very key in order to getting a handle on this. So let's now talk about how to respond to changing requirements and how to fulfill those resource demands. First, I've got a story to relate to you with a head of IT that I had met with, and here's what he said to us. He said, the organization needs to innovate, and in order to innovate, it needs to create the capacity for team members to work on new stuff. Needed to create efficiencies for team members' current workloads. Translated, that means they were so busy working on the things that were there for operations and keeping the doors open and sustaining that the overwhelming of the resources with those things didn't give them very much bandwidth to work on the innovation and the new stuff that they needed to thrive as a business and move forward. The idea is we had to find ways to become more efficient, to free up or to prioritize some of those resources' time to work on the things that were going to advance us as an organization. So the characteristics of this scenario really are that market forces and competitive pressures really dictate to us that we must move forward and advance and thrive or die as far as innovation is concerned. But the reality is that there really needs to be a healthy balance between time we spend on innovation and time we spend on maintaining current operations. So the problems inherent in this is that there's so many ideas and requests. So how do you parse through all that and determine where to make the investments in money and human resources? It's just a deluge of volume in a lot of organizations. And then when you have all this, some organizations kind of pride themselves in not saying no, and that we just get it done and treat everything as a top priority. But in reality, there really is no free lunch. We can't just do everything. We can't do everything well. We can't do everything on time and meet the demands of our internal and external customers. Continuing demands to support the organization with these resources when operational changes come up. Resources get pulled off of innovative tasks just to keep the lights on to make sure everything keeps together. That's a common problem, and that operational things will take precedence at times when innovation is seen or treated as discretionary. So a shortage of the right resources and skill sets is another issue. If you have innovation that requires new technology, new approaches, and new thoughts, having resources that are already in our organization may not have those skill sets. And we might need to constantly upgrade and update the skill sets to meet current market trends and really take control of the marketplace. And also, with those resource constraints, if we don't have the right resources at the right time, it will definitely impact time to market and bringing to market the innovations that we come up with. And oftentimes, whether or not you're first, second, or third to market can have dramatic effects on what type of market share you're going to potentially get. So the idea is that these things are all important and driven very heavily by resource management and the right resources in the right places at the right time. How does EPM Live help this as a solution? Well, we provide end-to-end visibility that is really needed from the ideation stage, when these ideas and requests come in, all the way through execution and fulfillment. It goes beyond bulk resource requirements to phased resource demand and getting the right resources at the right time at different stages of development and innovation. It also is proactive in forecasting the proper skill sets and the labor pools to meet these changing market demands. So what do we have on hand? What resources of what types with what skill sets do we possess in our capacity? And then do we have them in sufficient quantities to meet the workload or demand that is being presented to us? And if not, how do we prioritize those? Now beyond that, understanding based upon those plans, how are we responding to the needs? How are we applying those resources? What do we end up executing on? And can we make the adjustments that we need as in-flight or in-process changes come upon us? The what-if analysis tools that I alluded to earlier on from a resource management capacity and prioritization perspective are definitely key. So in a quick summary and in a nutshell, we discussed that we must have visibility, we must have a purpose and a method to the madness in order to take control of our resource management situation. Now, the reality is that there's a lot of ways you can approach this, but there are many wrong answers and there's very few right answers. But the ones that you choose should all be based upon what fits your organization. You should really be honest with yourself on where you're at from a project management, resource management, maturity level, and what organizational readiness you have at this point in time, and see what you can tackle and sustain. Should you take a prescriptive model that's written down as a cookie-cutter approach? Probably not. What you need to do is do what's best for your organization. And it's always best to err on the side of simplicity, something that you can tackle, succeed with, and sustain. It's best to have an evolution where you have a series of sustained or a series of incremental successes rather than one big, overly ambitious failure. That's what sets EPM Live from the rest. We really have a scalable model that allows us to meet the needs of the simpler or lighter weight resource management processes, but have a very high ceiling to attack the rigors of even the most sophisticated resource management processes. So really the recommendation is to embark upon something that you feel your organization can realistically sustain, something that will stretch the organization to improve but not break along the way.
That's great, Jim. I think with that point, it brings us to our final section, which is, how to put a resource management practice in place based on your organization's, specific growth stage. But before I give some, specific steps you can take, I do want to state that, as with any transformation and change initiative, in resource management in particular, it's a longer time frame initiative with multiple phases, and it's complex and sophisticated because it touches on many different parts of your project and portfolio management process. We're talking here about defining and understanding in detail the people and skills that move the organization forward, and how we can receive, plan, and assign all their work in order to achieve our objectives. It's about enabling dialogue about all of the work in the organization and how we can enable faster and more automated requests and approvals, understanding of availability and capacity of everyone in the organization. So having said that, there's 4 specific areas that anyone can begin in order to put a resource management practice in place. The first one might sound like motherhood and apple pie. You've heard it before, which is executive sponsorship. But in this context of resource management, it's a little different because what you require is sponsorship from the resource managers, the resource owners. Really, resource management is partially a partnership between the project managers that request resources and the resource managers that are the owners of the resources. So if you come up with an approach and an implementation strategy that's going to work for those resource management managers that you depend on, then getting their buy-in is going to go a long way in driving the overall adoption. So focus on resource manager buy-in. The second I already talked about, but it's very important, which is before you even begin changing your process, take a step back and understand all of the different sources of work in the organization, and how that work is generated. How is it that all the different requests for work are generated? How is it planned, and how is it assigned by both project managers and resource managers? Related to this is understanding the capacity of the resource based on those different types of work they have assigned. An application support resource work availability is very different than a network engineer, is very different than a developer. So you really have to get into the details of every one of those roles. So the third point, at a basic level, there's an important step for you to formalize how work gets requested, and that's what we call the demand management process. So in most implementations, we take a very simple step of formalizing those tools and the steps, the process for registering all those different work requests. And it has to include the resource requirement. It used to be that we have to develop these very extensive business cases, which is still important. But if it doesn't have resource requirements, you really don't have that picture of demand. So make sure that we include the resource requirement in your demand management. And then finally, also might sound obvious, but it's really important to develop a roadmap for resource management improvement. And really, when we say roadmap, we're talking about a timeline that in very specific terms articulates the implementation steps versus the expected benefits for every one of those phases. This is going to allow actually your organization to manage expectations internally with all the different stakeholders and also give you detail into what is going to be required to succeed and the time to value from going through this journey of implementing resource management in your organization.
Great stuff, Jose. So really to sum up in general the podcast, hopefully you found some of this information helpful for you today. We've got a lot of experience dealing, on the front lines with people's pain points in these areas and helping them overcome them. We understand the struggle with constant change and what you're going through as an organization. So let's keep the conversation going. Feel free to reach out to us at sales@epmlive.com to learn more, or to simply visit our site at epmlive.com to look at your resource management capabilities and what we can do for you. You could possibly even sign up for a demo, or just talk to one of us about some of the requirements that you have.
So at this point, we're going to start into our Q&A part of the podcast, so feel free to start typing your questions in the chat box. Before we get into the Q&A, our moderators want me to share with you your free PDU information. Feel free to follow the following steps, and we are showing it on the screen, but I'm going to, for those that are in listen-only mode, you can log into your PMI account, select report PDUs. You're going to have to find our activity, and the activity number for this podcast is PDU number 2750 082114. You should be able to see the activity come up when you search for it. Again, that number was PDU number 2750 082114.
And there will be an email going out sending that information as well to all of you that registered.
So feel free to put in your questions in the chat box if you're online, and Jim and I can go through and respond to any of them.
Okay.
I'm going to go ahead and read it out. So does resource management only pertain to larger organizations, or can any organizations of any size benefit from resource management practice? I'll go ahead and let you take that.
As far as any size of organization, resource management is probably the key pain point while people come to us for solutions. And I would say size of organization doesn't necessarily be the indication of the level of complexity or the level of challenge. It's really the nature of the work that you're doing and the complexity. For example, we have worked with a number of small and mid-sized organizations whose challenge isn't just a few large-size initiatives and operations, that they're juggling large numbers of, say, small initiatives and how to prioritize those. So when you compile it all together, complexity can be facing smaller organizations. I mean, we have very simple implementations for very large organizations, and we have very complex processes and methods for small organizations. So I would say, given the nature of your challenge, I think that's about really whether or not resource management can benefit your organization.
Excellent. Thanks, Jim. Looking here to see if we received any other ones.
Hi, all. I see one in the box. It says, I have a highly visible public project, and it is being delayed by another agency due to the resource constraints. How can resource management be handled outside of my organization to benefit us?
That's an interesting challenge. One of the things about using external organizations is really the relationship you have with them and how much visibility you have into their data and how much collaboration there is. We have a lot of organizations that actually make the actual resources from their external vendors, contractors, or partners part of the resource planning mix, so they get very definitive on which resources from those organizations are going to be working on certain things. That lets you kind of plan them very much like you would an internal resource. On the other hand, based on contractual relationships, you may only get very general information on the type of resource that's going to be applied. Irrespective of that, hopefully you have things in place in your agreements where there's an accountability on what work is being performed and what's being expended. It can be definitely be a challenge based upon whether or not you're doing kind of time and materials work with them where you really are looking at what the hours spent are, or sometimes when you insist or embark upon fixed priced efforts, you know, your partner or vendor or contractor may feel it's not something that they're accountable for as long as they deliver. The key there is a lot more on the end of project control beyond resource management to make sure that resources are staying, that your partners are staying on track as far as their commitments and deliverables, and having the planning detail you have at a sufficient level of detail that you don't have to wait till the end of an event or a phase to find out that you're in trouble. So there it's a combination of visibility into the resources that you're willing to negotiate with your partner, as well as having good tactical deliverable tracking to understand if you're on track and making progress towards the goals on a good schedule basis.
Here's another good one. What is the biggest problem you have seen related to resource management, and how was it solved?
The biggest problem, that's a big question.
I mean, I'll add the biggest and most common, which is, so you put a process in place which really requires engagement from all the different stakeholders. And what that means is that, you know, everybody has to be all in terms of maintaining the data set and the data integrity in order for you to have that visibility, capacity, and predictability. So it's being able to maintain the process and maintain folks engaged so that you can get that benefit from resource management. And you know, how you overcome that is, again, by phasing it, making it easier, getting executives involved in integrating the resource management outputs as part of the decision support, and providing a lot of support to the users, both you know, at the lowest level, which is a team member updating tasks, to the project manager updating schedules, to a resource manager, which is usually where the rub comes in, because they're the ones that, you know, this is added work for them to be able to track assignments. So you know, build in that change plan that allows everybody to you know, continue with your transformation initiative.
Well, and this also gets into, Jose, the idea of, you know, doing what's realistic for your organization based upon where you're at. You know, there's high-level capacity planning at a top-down level, which is at a level of granularity that's easier to tackle. You know, you're planning FTEs and headcount, you know, at a project or an initiative level, as opposed to like what you were describing, you know, the detailed assignments on tasks that, you know, could be thousands of tasks across multiple resources that requires a level of rigor, you know, and consistency of planning across all the stakeholders and all the participants to make sure that that data is reliable. A lot of organizations find that that top-down approach is something that's easier to get started with and sustain, yet even though they want to get to more that bottoms-up detailed approach later on when they're more mature and have more consistent processes. What's nice about a tool like EPM Live and the way we solve that is we offer both the top-down planning and the bottoms-up resource planning, and we even have visibility to reconcile between the two. So you may do capacity planning as that theoretical that Jose talked about earlier on, and then you can actually map that against how you're actually tactically planning to assign resources to individual deliverables and tasks. The idea is how much of that you're ready to take on as an organization. So it goes back to some of that earlier question, what should we do as an organization, or, you know, should we start as a certain size of organization? There's a level of detail of resource management rigor that's available to most anybody. It's just a matter of what you're equipped to handle now versus what you may be able to mature into later.
Speaking of EPM Live's capabilities and what sets it apart, one of our attendees wants to know, they are currently evaluating one of our competitors at task as well. You know, what's a few things that set EPM Live apart?
I think what sets EPM Live apart is our focus on all work. It's really about being involved in not just project-related work, whether it be waterfall projects or agile projects, but it's more of the treating all actionable items as work in our organization. So whether it be service request work, whether it be maintenance requests, whether it be iterative-based software development using Agile or Scrum, whether it's waterfall projects that are using traditional planning waterfall tools like Microsoft Project or our own waterfall planning tools. The key is you can take a very broad definition of work in our solution and accommodate all work. And we have different application variations for different permutations of project, portfolio, and work management. Meaning, even though there's common threads in that concept, if you're in product development versus professional services versus IT project management versus marketing versus finance projects and other capital projects that might happen from a construction or facilities perspective, there are different nuances and processes that have to be developed, and we have applications for all those variations but still have them under the common context of EPM Live. A lot of tools out there in the marketplace today will take that traditional project management focus and try to, a better term is to jury-rig that to make project tasks kind of simulate what those other things are but don't really meet the unique needs of those particular work items. So I think the flexibility of all work and those variations is probably where EPM Live shines.
Yeah, and Jim, related to that, very related to that, is the ability to give different areas of the organization their own space to do projects their own way, manage resources, and then give the overall organization the ability to roll up all of that work and see it according to that enterprise standard. So accommodating the different types of methodologies, the different styles in project management, while having that overarching framework that everybody can use is also, I think, an attribute that why organizations select EPM Live. You can have you can be rigorous, and at the same time, through the use of our different apps and the different configurations, have lighter weight type of project and resource management, and then bring it all together under one perspective for leadership and a consolidated view.
Great, thanks guys. There's more questions coming. So one of our attendees wants to know, resource management is just one aspect of project management. Why did you decide to emphasize on this topic today?
Well, I would say that it's probably the most prevalent and hard to achieve pain point for many of our customers. When people want to do things like simple task management or issue management and risk management and other things around that, sometimes folks can find other tools. People are doing those things very, in lists and spreadsheets and SharePoint lists and other things like that. But where people really find that there's tools that really go beyond just tracking inventories of things, it's in the area of resource management. And at the end of the day, we find that all the best task planning and project planning can go to the wayside if you don't temper those plans with the reality of your ability to apply resources to them. Just because I say in a plan or a task that I'm going to get Jim on a task on Monday, if I'm working on 3 other things, the reality is I'm not getting Jim, and my work's not going to get done. So I could be basing things on fallacious assumptions. So the resource management piece, I think, is the fundamental piece of the real true ability to deliver. And we also find that that's probably the things that most organizations are struggling with, and they're having the hardest time finding ways to just do maybe in-house innovation and things to accommodate that.
That's a great point, Jim. Another great question. How would you divide resource management in a large organization across different regions?
Well, definitely geographically dispersed organizations, whether they be regions within just domestically or global organizations, is really a reality today. Whether or not you're a small company that has partners or you're outsourced or near some work, but the idea there is that you can organize a resource pool virtually any way you like. If you're working as virtual teams, and it doesn't really matter where a resource is located as long as they're into the mix of things, you can almost treat everybody equivalently. But if you're really looking at where geographic and time zone differences really make a difference on what you can assign to people, a system like EPM Live or a process that you put in place that makes their location and their availability to do certain types of work based upon geography as a piece of metadata or a characteristic you keep about those resources, it allows you to make that a parameter that you can use when selecting or seeing what type of resources you have available. One of the nice things about a flexible tool like an EPM Live is that you can really fashion any type of metadata or characteristics or categories of resources that you would like that would help you best describe and drill into and manage the resources that you have. So I would say the more collaborative you can be and interchangeable with resources, that's great. But the fact that you might be constrained by geographical or regional concerns, we can segment those resources the way you like. And even really segment permissions so that maybe resources in certain regions can only be assigned by certain regional folks. There's a lot of flexible ways to do access and do your resource allocation and management process based upon that, that constraint.
I mean, I would add, Jim, that based on our most complex implementations, you need a lot more structure and governance and coordination, while at the same time trying to keep it simple and consumable by all the different stakeholders. So it might be a longer journey. You might have a longer roadmap, but it's about creating an adoption plan that gives you value and outcomes from implementing the process and the solution, while at the same time making it very easy and consumable for everyone in the organization.
Great. Here's another great question. Keep them coming. Lots of great ones. This attendee says, we struggle with a common language around resource management. Can you please define demand management versus capacity planning, and what is useful and what is a useful standard to bring into the organization?
Well, that's an interesting question, and I would say from a project management perspective in general, I think one of the keys of success is to have a common lexicon and a common terminology so that we know we're all talking about the same things from an interpretation perspective. And that applies equally as well to resource management. I would say from a demand management and a capacity planning perspective, nomenclature that we see often there, demand management often refers to all the facets of demand that come in, whether they be different work types or work requests, the scope of things that are being requested, the business requirements of things that are being requested, the size of things that are being requested. And resource management, I see, is the resource capacity of that is one aspect of that. Resource capacity planning really is focused on resources themselves. What is the inventory or capacity of resources we have, sliced into the different categories and types of resources that make the most sense for you, and then determining against that demand that's coming in and the resource implications or requirements of that demand that's coming in, matching those things up with the resource capacity plan. So I think that's where I most often see the delineation. But you're right, you commonly hear people use demand management in a more generic term, and sometimes it's hard to discern what people are meaning by demand management. You really almost have to ask them what their definition is. We find the same thing with portfolio management. Some folks say, I want portfolio management. Well, does that mean they just want portfolio visibility and be able to see all the projects both coming in and when they're actively in flight? Where some folks really think about portfolio management as the intake and selection process, the scoring and prioritization and selection of investments that the organization wants to make. So you really have to drill in sometimes until you have that common lexicon, but I see your point there where people use demand management very broadly.
I mean, I would add that really the purpose of implementing a transformation initiative like this is to develop that enterprise standard. So really one of the outputs from implementation is having that language, and I use the term enterprise standard because that's really our hymnal. How are we all going to talk about resource management? Now your point on capacity management and demand management, it's from our perspective, it can be a chicken and egg situation because I would say that you really can have true resource management without first doing demand management, which is trying to capture all of the work correctly in the same fashion with the same terminology as you mentioned. But at the same time, you can't really do that without having an idea of your resource pool and the capacity of those resources, and that's where capacity management comes. I mean, in reality, it's based on your pain points, your priorities, and the value you can obtain. I have seen organizations, focus first on demand management, so they understand where all the work is coming from first, and others that have, are simply going in flight, taking in, everything that's been requested, and just focusing on capacity planning and capacity management, which is again seeing where availability is, true availability of resources, and then making the right decisions on, how to make those allocations during a planning cycle.
Great. Here's one. A component of resource management is maintaining a skills assessment and inventory. Do you have any suggestions on how to create and maintain the baseline and updates for your resource pool, and then to use it properly, and to use it to properly resource a project and develop skills gaps and talent development plans?
Well, one of the things, I think there's a number of different aspects to that question. Some of them are resource management related from executing on resource plans, and some of it's a pseudo HR function. But we find that there's a high desire in the marketplace for people to have a skills inventory as part of their resource pool, so they can ultimately select the right resources based on a number of different criteria. The real question is, we have, I often see, and what often happens is a lack of wherewithal. It's really, the real suggestion is you need to have stick-to-itiveness and wherewithal and make it a priority if you want it to work. I've seen many an organization put an initial skills inventory up based upon current skill sets, but then what? How quickly does that become updated, outdated, I should say, to where it's not as meaningful? And what is a viable method to actually have those things updated? If I look at a YouTube video over the weekend on C#, does that mean I should be putting C# in my skill set? Or there's some other types of standards and vetting process to legitimately say I have these skills, or at what level I have those skills. So it really is one of those enterprise standards that needs to be managed, not only to keep it current, but also to make sure that the data in there is valid. So once again, it's another process and a change process that needs to be factored in if skills management is something you want to have be done effectively. But I tell you, it's an area that I do see people, they have ambitions to get there, but then don't seem to have the wherewithal to stick it out.
So it's interesting because I would say that in almost every one of our implementations, there is the desire to integrate with an HR system or identity management where they might have actually skills and roles already defined. So part of portfolio management and resource management, becomes, from a technical standpoint, developing those integrations and those links to those existing repositories of skill sets. And that's more of what you currently have versus what you currently need. And in the need standpoint, there's a very old technique that's been used in resource management, is really to use generic resources. So, in terms of defining the roles and the skills, it can help define the gaps. Because if you really don't have, the type of resources that you need that will be represented within a project management, resource management system by those generic roles. So, that can be a valuable first step in defining the gap. And then, in most cases, you either have to hire or, have external vendors come in and do that work for the generics.
Great. Another one came in. Is it possible for resource management tools to be used to determine the effect of losing a specific resource on a number of related or distinct projects scheduled over a long period of time?
Well,
Go
ahead, Jose. No, go ahead.
No, I was going to say that, absolutely. I mean, if you have, first of all, I'm going to make an assumption that you have resource-loaded schedules or resource-loaded work plans. So you have identified, even at a high level, at a phase level, which are the types of resources that that you are going to need in your multiple projects. In our EPM Live solution, you can have different types of resource in a resource plan, and you can actually see across the board the impact of not having those resources. You can, even at an individual level, you can take resources away and then see by resource type what the deficit is going to be, for the different projects. And that's really an end goal, by the way. You want to have that predictability to see the impact of changing conditions, such as attrition. Folks move on to other opportunities. So how is that going to impact us? So your solution needs to have that capability, so you can then predict and make changes accordingly.
Great. IT/S departments to integrate your products into those existing systems. What is your experience and approach in integrating with companies that currently have existing processes that are leveraging SharePoint?
Well, that's definitely an easy one because we're a SharePoint-based solution. So we don't just integrate with SharePoint, we actually are built in SharePoint. So if folks are already using SharePoint for other purposes, we actually install incrementally into your existing SharePoint environment and provide all of our capabilities in that context. So if you're using SharePoint today for other content, other collaboration, other business process, we can just be incrementally added to that. Okay? So we install either on-premise in your existing SharePoint farm, or we provide it as a cloud-based solution that you can subscribe to. In either case, we have connector technology and other types of APIs that we do integrations with other solutions all the time. So it's not necessarily a rip and replace. We can definitely leverage data or workloads that are being generated in other solutions and bring them into EPM Live and really be the aggregating solution to bring in items from multiple solutions to make that happen. And it can be bidirectional. We can be putting things out to other solutions as well that's being generated within EPM Live. So that's something we commonly do.
I think that's a very appropriate scenario for EPM Live. You mentioned that we are a solution built on SharePoint, but it really gives the organization the ability to provide in partnership with IT the tools as a shared service, the solution as a shared service. We've actually focused on this a lot. We have a number of customers that are taking this approach, where you can have the entire organization using that SharePoint platform that you have. And there's different modes for us to provide it, whether it's SaaS linked to your existing SharePoint or on-premise. We have the ability to deliver to that enterprise platform. So it's definitely an opportunity from cost savings and enterprise process standardization.
Great points. Here's one more. I know you touched on this with getting senior leadership on board, but it sounds like there's a few questions where they really need help. How can you get your senior leadership team to help project managers manage resources? In other words, how do you stop accepting the unplanned projects?
Jose, do you want to take a first stab at that? Or?
Yeah, so it's interesting because everything that we've been talking about actually allows you to provide that answer. In a situation where all projects are accepted and we have endless resources or assumed to have endless resources, you need to have the data points and you need to have accurate decision support reporting and graphics that shows what everybody's working on and what the trade-offs are going to be for sequencing projects, because that's really what it comes down to. what's going to get done first, because we can't have everyone working 24 hours a day. So you need to have the ability to have all of that information available, so you can put it in front of leadership, and then make decisions on how you're going to sequence projects based on true capacity, true availability of resources. And they're tough decisions, but if you don't have that, then it's a very difficult scenario, facing leadership and not being able. Why don't we? I thought we have endless resources. But let me show you exactly why. All of this work has come in. This is what we're currently working on. This was our last quarterly planning cycle, and these are the constraints that we're having. Based on our assessment, this is our recommendation. Is this good to go? Because then you can go back to the business and then explain the situation. And most of our customers that use this approach, then if you're faced with demanding the business that's making those requests, then there's a negotiation of whether to go outside and hire more resources or drop maybe existing work that's currently in place in order to come and execute higher priority work that has just come in. Without having the process and tools of understanding where the work is coming from and the capacity, you folks, you can't really get in front and make those arguments, those trade-offs.
Great points. Here's another one that just came in. Can you integrate into SharePoint Online?
Absolutely. We actually have an out-of-the-box integration with SharePoint Online or Office 365, meaning that you can subscribe to EPM Live, and we have the integration points into SharePoint Online / Office 365. Not only that, so you can leverage the EPM Live tools through SharePoint Online, but also share data points or map data between the two. So yes, there's definitely a way for us to dovetail and integrate with SharePoint Online and Office 365.
Great. I think that we went through them all. If anyone has a last-minute question, feel free to add it to the questions box or the chat box. But I think we have touched on all of them that came in.
Well, thank you for the participation of everybody out there. Great to have the questions and the attendance. So please feel free to reach out to us. Look at us at epmlive.com or reach out to us at sales@epmlive.com if you want to discuss these things further about how they might apply to your specific organization.
We look forward to helping you overcome challenges, and it's very